I just have a couple quick announcements today. One is that we're going to do 2 offerings today. The first one, just like normal, during the last song, we're going to have the ushers pass the baskets around, and that's the normal offering that we have every Sunday. The second one, the ushers are going to pass around the basket, and that is specifically for the renovation costs. We've been able to do some amazing things down there, getting everything just so. And as you may or may not know, when you do renovations, sometimes they run a little bit higher than what you thought because you get into a project and you don't realize, oh, hey, I need to do this as well. And so just to help out the church's bottom line to be able to complete this and move forward, we do need to take up a second offering, and so if you can feel led to give there, please do so. And know that also when the leadership team saw this shortfall, that amongst the team we raised over $2,000. So the leadership team is behind this and has given sacrificially as well. So just so you know that we're not asking you to do what we haven't done. So I want to thank you all for that. And I also want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank God for all mothers today, and take time to show your appreciation, whether it's for someone here or someone who is going on. So I want to just extend that warm welcome to you all. We're in the middle of our sermon series on the parables of Jesus, and as with the last few weeks, I want to begin with an explanation of what parables are and how and why Jesus used them in his ministry, because they are significant. They're a significant way that Jesus used to communicate bigger ideas. They're not just a story for a story's sake, but they're to convey a bigger idea. There are many literary forms in the Bible. There's poetry, there's proverb, there's legal documents, there's dramatic narratives, there's hymns, there's sermon and theological treatises, and there's personal letters, as well as apocalyptic vision. And all of these are sprinkled into the genres that are figures of speech and word pictures that highlight what is being said. The form that a writer or speaker chooses to use in order to communicate his or her message indicates its meaning and how it should be treated and interpreted. We launched into this mini-series almost a month ago now in dealing with the use of parables. Jesus' stories usually had one main idea. Some of the parables were true stories taken from everyday life. They're told as fact in the present tense. Because we've all seen seeds growing or children playing, yeast at work, in dough, sheep grazing, and we all know what it's like to lose something. Jesus told these true stories about things like that, everyday common things in life. Some of the parables were story parables, and these stories, which may or may not have a basis in historical events, that's not the point. The point is they're meant to convey a significant truth. Jesus made up some of these stories and used them as illustrations. I do that in my sermons, and most pastors do use illustrations to kind of make the point. And usually we attempt to be funny, but we fail. But we use those illustrations as kind of like the exclamation point, or a way of making the point that we're trying to make relevant to where your audience is. And so Jesus used parables in the same thing. They're example stories. They give us examples of either something to do or something not to do. They focus on the character and the conduct of an individual or individuals. And while these stories teach us many good and wholesome things, as we have been learning, the parables do 2 things that are often overlooked. First, the stories that Jesus indicate that he was fully acquainted with human life and many experiences. Secondly, they reveal his heart. They tell his autobiography and the autobiography of God. Do you want to know how God feels about people being a good neighbor? Read the story of the Good Samaritan. Do you want to know how God feels when someone who is lost finally finds their way home again? Read the story of the prodigal son. Do you want to know how Jesus feels about people obeying His teaching? Then read the story about the house built on rock or sand. If you want to know how to approach God in prayer for salvation, read the parable that we studied last week about the Pharisee and the tax collector. We're going to continue today by looking at the rich fool, balancing the temporal with the eternal. Jesus told this story in Luke's Gospel to teach us to balance the temporary with that which is eternal. So please turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 12. We're going to be looking at verses 16 through 21. And Jesus said, then He told a parable. The land of a certain rich man produced an abundant crop. So he thought to himself, what should I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? Then he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of goods stored up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and celebrate. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded back from you. But who will get what you have prepared for yourself? So it is with the one who stores up riches for himself, but is not rich toward God. There's a single character in this story, and he's going to be our main sermon point today because he represents the struggle to balance the temporary side of life with the eternal side of life. There was an incident that provoked this teaching. There was a disagreement over inheritance. There's kind of like the backstory to this parable. An unknown man in the crowd wanted Jesus to make his brother divide some inherited property fairly. Now, it's never spoken, but the man must have felt like he didn't get enough. I'm sure he wasn't asking Jesus to make his brother take more of his money, but rather, I suspect that greed was tearing this man's family apart. He was so focused on getting his fair share that he disregarded what it was doing to his own flesh and blood. Haven't we all seen that happen before in our own lives? Usually when someone in the family passes away, it's kind of like an episode from the TV show Families Behaving Badly. You see these people just ripping each other apart. I officiated a funeral once for a gentleman who he had passed away, and he had several children, several daughters. And a couple of them lived in the same area that this man did. One of them lived out west. I think intentionally, distance. She kept her distance. When she was notified by her sisters of her father's passing and the time of the funeral, she said, well, if I come back, will I get my check? And her sister said, well, no, it's not going to be ready for a while. We've got to go through probate. We've got to do all this and that. She goes, okay, well, call me when my check's in the mail. Tears us apart. Tears the fabric of the family apart. Sometimes because we want to know what we're going to get. We're focused on the wrong thing. Jesus very wisely refused to be involved in the arbitration of this matter and instead told a story, which is our focus today. A wealthy farmer had an exceptional summer because at harvest time he gathered a bumper crop. If you know any farmers, around here, a bumper crop, rare. Go down to Mercer County. That's when the farmers get bumper crops. All the time. I don't know any farmer down in Mercer County who has a bad year. I don't know why, but that's just a blessed area. The first century world... Say what?
I've seen bad years down there.
Not many. They usually have some good stuff. I have some friends down there who are farmers, and they usually do pretty well. But a wealthy farmer had this exceptional summer. The first century world didn't have certificates of deposit or stocks that you could buy. They measured wealth in grain, in garments, in land and gold and animals. This man had an abundance of grain. What happened after this small introduction is quite literal and deeply spiritual. Jesus used what's known in literary circles as a soliloquy. a dramatic or literary form of discourse in which the character reveals his or her thoughts when alone or unaware of the presence of other characters. So these are not things that this particular businessman was saying out loud to others. These were his deep inner thoughts that Jesus lets us listen into. Knowing that there is a God who is listening in on your deepest thoughts and motivations of your heart is something that we all need to remember. There was a chairman of a community charity who called on this notorious miser. "Sir," said the fundraiser, "our records show that despite your wealth, you've never once given to our drive." The man said, do your records show that I have an elderly mother who was left penniless when my father died? Do your records show that I have a disabled brother who is unable to work? Do your records show that I have a widowed sister with small children who can barely make ends meet? "No, sir," replied the embarrassed volunteer. "Our records don't show those things." "Well," said the miser, "if I don't give to any of them, why should I give to you?" The miser serves to underscore the story of the rich fool. But he wasn't all bad. This rich fool wasn't all bad. Okay, I don't want you to get that impression. Jesus wasn't saying that this was a completely immoral man whose values were so far out of whack that he was unsavable. That Jesus wasn't saying that. This successful businessman in Jesus' story demonstrates some wonderful characteristics. He was an employer, right? You've got to remember that for him to have this bumper crop and him to amass such wealth, he had to have servants. There were servants and managers to administer his farm business. I can't imagine having this farm all alone. Dozens of people were necessary, so he employed a number of people. He was a builder. The idea of growth and expansion is also a great and noble thing. That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad thing to be aware of, that when you need to grow and expand and build. Improving your facilities so that more can be served is the thing to do. He was also an investor. Investing for the future is a wise thing to do. We never hear of anything being done dishonestly with this farmer. He was an entertainer. He didn't forget to live and enjoy life with his friends. You see, he had all of these underlying solid businesses and life principles in place. So Jesus isn't talking about, oh, well, a man's sentiment about, you have plenty for years to come, eat, drink, and be merry is not a bad thing. Everything within due bounds. Everything within, we want to keep our passions and those sorts of things in check, right? And this man obviously did that because he worked. He invested, he built, he looked toward the future. It wasn't just for the now. So he had those good principles in place. I think this concept of working hard and being blessed for your hard work is a wonderful idea. We need those who are willing to shoulder the entrepreneurial load so that new companies and corporations can provide men and women with jobs, which enable them to earn adequate wages to support and feed their families. Jesus was not condemning those things. Nor was he interested in making wealthy people feel guilty for God's blessing. Life and blessings are to be enjoyed in accordance to God's will and plan for our lives. This is not what Jesus was after. I pray that for the business people here that God's blessings will be on your investments and in your businesses. Why? Because you have the right values in place to know what to do with God's blessings after you receive them. So many people miss that part of the story. They focus on the wrong thing. I read a story about a guy who came to church with his family. As they were driving home, he was complaining about everything. The music was too loud. The sermon was too long. The announcements were unclear. The building was hot. The people were unfriendly. He went on and on, complaining about virtually everything in the church. And finally, his very observant son said, "Dad, you've got to admit, that wasn't a bad show for $1." Jesus is after something far more significant than just $1 in this story. In this success story, there's something tragically missing. God is never found in his story or even acknowledged in any way. Greed had replaced God in this man's life with things. In other words, money and possession had become his gods. Instead of wanting more and more of God, it was about more and more things. The wrong things, as it turned out. Success is a wonderful thing, but getting acquainted with the God of success is even better. And this man had missed it. As a result, God called him a fool, someone who lives as if there is no God. Think about it. It was God who provided him the talent and the ability to have such a successful business. It was God who gave him the sunshine and rain and rich soil to grow his crops. It was God who had granted him the measure of health in order to keep up with what the businesses demanded. Yet he never even tips his hat to God. Ever. He had missed life's true purpose, thinking that life's purpose was to accumulate as much as you can. He who dies with the most toys wins, right? That was his mentality. Rather than applying this talent and resources as a service to others for God's glory, it was all about what he wanted out of life. Rather than enriching his life by turning to God to find meaning and fulfillment, he was about eating, drinking, and being merry. The resources that God had blessed him with were simply to be consumed according to his own appetites and fancies. He was all about bigger barns. And now, rather than his own spiritual needs and the eternal needs of others, barn by barn, he grew further and further away from his true purpose in life. Barn by barn, the people in his life grew distant. Barn by barn, his wealth seemed to have isolated him from all human contact. Barn by barn, he wasn't free to be what he could have been to those around him. He never consulted God or anyone else. So by the time we reach him in the story, this employer, this builder, this investor, and this entertainer had become so isolated that he talked only to himself and no one else. Greed will do that to you. It drives you to make more, own more, become more to an excessive degree. His possessions ended up possessing him. Finally, we see what was driving his expansionary plans and policies. Based on how Jesus characterizes this man in all likelihood, he was preparing to charge a higher price for his grain in case of famine. Bigger barns would have accommodated that goal. Buy low, sell high, use people's hunger to make a fortune. You know, one of the opening scenes in Scrooge is where Scrooge is negotiating the price of corn with someone, and because they didn't take his price the day before, he upped it 5%. And they said, well, that's not fair. You know, our bread will be dear, the poor will pay. You know, he said, I really don't care. That's not my problem. You know, you take it now at this rate, you know, this higher rate, or come back tomorrow and it's going to be even higher. Something happened, though, that this man never expected. God had an appointment set up with this man, and that was called death. And God called him to give an account at the moment he least expected it, and because his greed had blinded his eyes to the reality of death. When the barns are full and everything is going our way, we never know when we are one breath away from eternity. We could be brushing our teeth, driving our car, eating our dinner, and then we're gone. And the barns suddenly don't matter anymore. Our biggest concern then is not what we left behind, but what lays before us, eternity. I remember hearing a story that my pastor told a long time ago. Well, maybe not that long, I'm not that old. But he was telling about a man who was very, very wealthy, and when he died, he went to heaven and he saw all these great, big houses and, you know, very palatial places, and, you know, St. Peter's taking him along, showing him all of this, and he sees, you know, people that he knew in his life, people he had employed, servants that had these huge palatial mansions, and he's thinking, man, if this guy, if Mike Gardner has this, my place must be ginormous. Well, finally they come to this shack, and he says, well, here is your home for eternity. And the man says, wait, what's this? I was a man of importance. My gardener has this palatial mansion over here, and I get this shack, he said. And St. Peter said, well, we did the best with the resources you sent us. It's something to think about. We laugh at that, but it's true. If God were to build your house based on the resources that you give back to Him, what kind of house would you have? And I'm not talking about dollar amounts. I'm not, I don't want you to get focused on that or think that I'm talking about if you only give $100 compared to someone who gives $10,000, that person is somehow more religious than you or more connected to God than you or somehow more spiritual than you. That's not the case. It's a matter of the heart. And it's a matter of your finances. Someone who gives $10,000, that might be a drop in the bucket to them. That might be pocket change to them. Whereas $100 from you, or even $10 from you, is significantly more in terms of your finances. So it's not dollar amounts. Don't get caught up on that. It's a matter of the heart, how you feel led to give. And it's not just about tithing or giving. That's not why I have this sermon today. It's about eternal matters versus temporal matters. In your earning or your spending, be ready to invest in eternal things. Barns are great, but people are greater still. Be generous. What an incredible opportunity he must have had to accomplish so much good for his community. All for God's glory. He could have built hospitals or synagogues, homes for the needy. It's funny. There was a first century synagogue that we visited in Israel. And there's a seat called the Moses seat, right? That is in every synagogue still today. But back then, it was carved out of stone. It was a very prominent seat. And even back then, our tour guide was transcribing what was on this seat. And it was basically a donor's plaque that was etched into the seat. The seat given by, I'm like, really? But even back then, so it was all about the name recognition. The most prominent seat. And I'm sure that was an expensive gift, but it was like, really? For God's glory, not your own. For God's glory, not your own. Instead of doing those things, he chose this lonely path of building bigger barns. Two men were marooned on an island. One paced back and forth, worried and scared, while the other man sat back and was sunning himself. The first man said to the second, "Aren't you afraid that we're going to die?" "No," said the second man, "I make $100,000 a year and I tithe faithfully to the church every week. My pastor will find me." In your blessing and your prospering, be ready to give God the credit. If you never get another barn, you've already been blessed in more ways than you deserve. Give God the credit. Some would say, "I've earned this. It's been my hard work to get me where I am." No. God blessed you with the gifts and the abilities to earn what you have, along with providing opportunities that He has strategically placed in your path. Divine appointments, in other words. Others have worked just as hard as you, but have not been as nearly as blessed. Give God the credit. In your playing and celebrating, be ready to give an account. You're not the owner. Okay? You're not the owner. You are a steward that's been entrusted with resources that you are expected to use wisely. The things that you have are on loan from God. You will only have them a short period of time, and then they must be passed on. Enjoy and celebrate these gifts, but be accountable and don't hoard them. You're called to be a steward, not a hoarder. Ann Landers had an interesting letter in her column, for those of you who remember Ann Landers' columns. I think I have to find a way to update some of my illustrations because newspapers are kind of going by the wayside unless I use online newspapers. But blog. Yeah, there was a blog recently. So Ann Landers had this letter in her column. It was from a girl who was writing about her aunt and uncle. She said, "My uncle is the tightest man I've ever known. All his life, every time he got paid, he took $20 out of his paycheck and put it under his mattress. Then he got sick and was about to die. As he was dying, he said to his wife, I want you to promise me one thing. Promise what? She asked. I want you to promise me that when I'm gone, you'll take my money from under the mattress and put it in my casket so that I can take it all with me. The girl's letter went on with the story. He died, and the wife kept her promise. She went in, got all the money that the day that he died, went to the bank, deposited it, and wrote a check out and put it in his casket. In your growing and maturing, be ready to give an account. Be ready to begin again. Balancing the temporal with the eternal is a difficult thing. We must adjust ourselves constantly in the materialistic areas of life. Today is a great day to begin again. Maybe the bulk of your life has been given to barn building. How about turning now toward kingdom building? You're going to have to let loose of everything someday. Why not turn it all over to God and let Him begin to guide you so that you can begin to see the fruit of your labor before you have to say goodbye? What if you heard those words, "Tonight you will die"? Are you ready for that?
Yep.
Are you ready to give an account for the way that you've raised or are raising your family? Are you ready to give an account for what you're doing with your talent and your abilities? Are you ready to give an account for the way that you're spending your time and your energy? Are you ready to give an account for what you've done with the money and the wealth that God has already blessed you with? Are you ready to give an account for the way that you're using your body and managing your appetites? That's a hard one for me. I'm like, ooh. Someday, there's going to be a knock at your life's door. Death will be waiting outside. The music will suddenly stop. The frantic whirling of the dancers will cease, and you and I must answer that door. Soon thereafter, what we did with the gift of life will be required of us. Imagine it this way, that your life is able to be represented as a picture. Your whole life. I know that'd be a heck of a picture, right? The good, the bad, the messy, the neat, all of that stuff in a picture. You have to, it's hanging up there, and you have to explain to Jesus this picture. You know, imagine it that way. Or imagine, this picture is hanging up in an art gallery after you've gone and people are going by. Will they look at it and say, wow, that was a life truly blessed. That was a life that impacted others. That was a life that I want to emulate. Remember last week we talked about having a life worth imitating. Are you living a life worth imitating? Parents, mothers, are you living a life that you want your children to emulate? We have to think about that because they watch us, and when they become adults, what do you want them to do? Now, we all make mistakes, okay? So don't get hung up on the mistakes, but are we living a life that our children should imitate? Are we living a life that those out there who we want to bring in here are going to imitate? Or should imitate? We've got to think about that. At the end of your life, will you be considered a hoarder or a steward? Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for allowing us to be stewards of what you have blessed us with. You have blessed us in so many ways, and Lord, to be honest, we don't give you the credit often enough. So right now, Lord, today, I just want to thank you for everything that you have blessed us with, whether it is the time that we have here on earth, the finances that you have given us, the talents that you have given us. We thank you, Lord, for that. And especially this time in this church, when we see talents being put to use for your kingdom. All of the work down there at the new building that's being done is so incredible. And we thank you for the gifts that you have given Tom and Barb and all the others that have worked down there. We thank you for those gifts, Lord, and for their willingness to not be a hoarder on this, but to give those gifts back to you. We thank you for that. And there's some of us that are not gifted in that mechanical way, Lord. And we stand back in awe of being able to put cabinets up and have them be straight. We thank you for that. We thank you, Lord, for having the ability to give how we can, not only financially, but in terms of our gifts. So we see in our lives the ability to give, whether it is through helping paint, helping run lines, helping hang cabinets, or whether it's just simply to show up and pack stuff in a box and help move it from one location to another. We thank you for all of the diversity of gifts that we are able to employ here to work in your kingdom. We thank you, Lord. We just ask that you would show us each and every day how we can give those things back to you for your glory and for the kingdom's work here on earth. We want people to see what it's like to truly give back to God. We want to be stewards, Lord. We don't want to be hoarders of these gifts that you have given us. So I ask that you help us to see ways that we can give back and be a blessing to others. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.